For those of you who don't remember, Jacob Zuma once proposed that we get ourselves a new nuclear power station. We didn't do it because it was too expensive. Well, our new GNU, led by Ramokgopa, who is the new energy minister, suggests that we should now get ourselves a nuclear power station, which will generate 2,500 megawatts of electricity, which is equivalent to a couple stages of load shedding.
I'm going to fact check you dramatically on this. The old power station was about 500 billion rand. It would generate close to 10,000 megawatts of power, and everything was in place to make it a reality. If you go to several people who build these things, they've got a build, own, and maintain model whereby they give you the power station, they pay for it, they maintain it, and they just sell you the electricity for half the price of what the current Eskom charge is per kilowatt. So nuclear under Jacob Zuma was not an issue. It was stopped by Western-funded NGOs. But now Ramokgopa has said that in order to increase the base load of South Africa, we need a new nuclear power station of 2,500 megawatts, which is a fifth of what Jacob Zuma proposed, which is a fantastic idea. Apparently to him, according to him rather, they're just finding out where to build it. But we already know where they can build it. They can only build it in Koeberg because that land has already been processed to such a degree that it can accommodate a nuclear reactor in the Western Cape.
I suppose what's actually really interesting is that what we are now finding is this type of power scheme is becoming more prevalent and is something that people are keen on. Now, to come back to your original point, the reason that we didn't have other people build these things to sell us the power in the past is because you couldn't. Remember that technically speaking, you couldn't really sell electricity to Eskom and they would provide it to you. Eskom had to generate it, own it, and then provide it onwards. Now, because of the supposed breakup and reform of Eskom, effectively what that's now meaning is that you can have the very models that you're describing.
But I think it's important to note that American-funded NGOs killed it in court. It wasn't because of corruption or anything. It wasn't even on the ground. There wasn't even a funding model, but the Western-funded NGOs killed it, which would have been alive and well by now, and I doubt would have had the load shedding that we did have over the course of the last 5 years. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What is important is that nuclear is a very important energy source to use in the energy mix of South Africa. I know people want their windmills and their solar panels. You can do that on some shithole island like Mauritius. Here we are a serious country. We need real energy, real power through coal and through nuclear, and the Minister of Electricity and Energy is saying exactly the same things as we are. We could even be special advisors, Byron, but unpaid, unfortunately.
Yes, we could. Now, you see, this actually becomes all very, very interesting because one of the original disputes, if you will, one of the reasons that those NGOs went against nuclear in the first place is because there's this idea that if the power station basically explodes, that we get a level of fallout equivalent to Chernobyl that would render certain areas of South Africa uninhabitable, like Kalisha, just saying. But effectively, what you would find in those instances is that they were like, well, you can't really trust Eskom to run this because, corruption and, the local people are too stupid to do it. And so inevitably they came up with many, many programs, let's call it that, campaigns, marketing bullshit, propaganda, some might say, to stop people wanting to actually implement the power station itself. And that propaganda led from environmental concerns to cost. Now, Ramon, what's actually very curious in these times is that, there's the old adage, like if you drop an actual nuclear bomb on somewhere, you're going to get Hiroshima, right? Nuclear fallout. Yep, bombs don't work that way anymore, mate. So if you look at the hydrogen bomb as an example, if you actually drop it, it doesn't cause the radioactive waste that, the old technology did. And the upshot of that is that actually the technology is advanced significantly to the point where the technology is actually pretty safe. So if South Africa wanted to go 100% green and using safe and secure electricity and energy production that would last us for the next 100 years and be very cheap and effective, this is the best way to do it. And as we've seen with the current route of no load shedding, we're having load reduction, and that's completely different, I'm assured. But what we are seeing by keeping the lights on is that we do get massive economic upsurge. So the actual economic benefit far outweighs any of the potential production costs.
But there's no production cost if you have the model of own, will build, maintain, and own, which is what a lot of these companies in Canada, South Korea, Russia, and France, who are the best known for building nuclear reactors, they have different funding models. They know very well countries can't afford to spend $20 billion on something. Abu Dhabi has a deal with the South Koreans, I believe. Egypt has a deal with Russia to build these nuclear reactors. Egypt, that place, like there's nothing happening there. They got a nuclear reactor. The fact that we don't, well, we got one in Kuburg, but that's another story entirely. It's not a question of cost. It's a question of Western-funded propaganda telling South Africa to be poor, to use renewable energy so that South Africans can't get ahead in life and to make South Africa less competitive. All of those concerns about radiation and fallout, those have been bunk for 50 years, and they still bunk today.
Yes, but obviously when you reference any form of cost, when referencing Eskom itself, one has to be very aware of the fact that Eskom's heavily in debt. Eskom's current estimations is that they are 3.1 trillion in debt. Well, that's what they'll be, at least in debt by 2050. And the answer to that is it's never going to get paid back, ever. And unfortunately, many municipalities around the country basically just can't afford to pay them. So when you reference any form of grid expansion or grid generation expansion and you attach a cost to it, inevitably the media class and the psyche of the average South African is, well, can't really afford it, right? And yes, you're very right. Those arguments don't inevitably hold true. So the upshot of all of this is, will it actually happen? What are your views?
So the DA released a press statement to say that there are concerns about the regulatory framework under which the minister is working. Apparently there's a court case about the regulations around opening a new nuclear reactor. They support nuclear power, but it needs to be safe, cost effective, and all the rest of it. And they don't believe that NERSA has done that. So I don't know. It does take about a decade to build. I wonder who will get it. So the only 2-3 countries who really matter are Russia, France, and South Korea. Maybe our relationship with Russia will be useful here to get this power station built. Rosatom is quite active here, the ones who are most well known to build nuclear reactors. And at the end of the day, if we can have cheaper electricity than before in Cape Town, because Cape Town, remember, the world's anti-nuclear activists, their homes get power from the only nuclear reactor in South Africa. All the Western Cape Karens, your power comes from Kuburg, believe it or not. And now you want to take that away from the rest of the country, which I think is quite unfair and not very nice. But I mean, they are Karens after all. I think it is a high possibility of happening this time around.
Yes, I think it's rather ironic that everything you just mentioned there about the DA, where they're like concerns about safety, we just talked about that. Concerns about cost, we just talked about that. It's always the same arguments that get raised. Yeah, I can't do it because of X. Insert reason here. And the reasons are just cut and paste. Now, for those of you who are all sitting there going, oh, just be an excuse to have corruption in Eskom, it's actually not that straightforward when it comes to nuclear. And arguably, it's the one area of Eskom that would have the least amount of corruption. And now the reason for that is because nuclear is heavily regulated right around the world. And it's actually regulated by international bodies. It's not regulated like on our national soil. So there's actually a lot of oversight of that because of the potential fallout. Arguably, there's actually far more corruption in solar and wind and, you know, all the other gas turbine bullshit that we have. So arguably, it's the one area of Eskom where corruption would be the least. But it's always a tough one in Iran because the global elites always want them to have what they don't want you to have. The very argument that you use for the Western Cape Karens. They want their power, but they just don't want the rest of us to have it. So let's hope that Ramaphosa actually gets this pulled off. And for once, I'm with the ANC on this. I hope it happens.
I mean, yeah,